I'm Denis Goldberg. I was number 3 accused in the Rivonia Trial. I spent 22 years in prison to put an end to racism in South Africa. Racism by law of apartheid. Cure Racism South Africa continues that struggle, and I, Denis Goldberg, support that struggle wholeheartedly. I think racism is a terrible blight on our land. I don't think we do enough proactively to deal with it. So I'm very happy that an organization saying cure racism has come into being. And the idea that it must take the message and the concepts to young people in schools, I think it's very important. Difficult task, because the effects of apartheid mean that many children at school don't see children of other races. The township schools are still essentially single race schools. But many children do go to the former Model C schools, and they do mix, as long as whites don't take their children out of the schools. But in every school, public and private, this idea of cure racism needs to be kept. They need to know that what they're doing is important for the future. The tolerance, the acceptance, but have to carry it across class barriers as well. Poor people of colour, of any colour, also people. You've got a tremendous job to do in cure racism. But I'm pleased you're starting to do it, and I support it fully. You're asking for something idealistic, and it's an ideal we have to hold out. We have to hold out the idea that we are equal, and our institutions have to genuinely recognize the needs of people, not distinguish on grounds of race or color or religion or anything else. So one of the things we have to do is not just pay lip service to the words of the Freedom Charter and our Constitution that says South Africa belongs to all who live in it, and our Constitution says we must redress the imbalance caused by our history of discrimination against people who were, forgive the language, not white. Mainly African, but also people of coloured and Indian groups, defined in our laws as such, and discriminated against at different ways and to different degrees in terms of political rights and social rights, to education, to health care, to nutrition, to jobs, freedom of movement, and so on. That's what we fought against. This denial of the common humanity of all our people in our country. But we repeat the same error over and over again. We say people are equal and people will be served equally. And I know the problem is overcoming the deep inequality and discrimination against African people in particular. But I find it fascinating that coloured people stress their white heritage and not their African heritage, and say, then we weren't white enough, now we're not black enough. But it's an attitude of mind. And there is a situation that we have where there were degrees of rights and privileges, from whites having full rights and political rights and trade union rights and able to open bank accounts, own property, through coloured people who had less rights, to Indian people who had even less, and African people who had they had some rights the courts would uphold, but in general officials could change them, determine them, until the struggle against apartheid became very intense. And so that's the deepest inequality that has to be overcome. But I'm distressed, for instance, by the school in Pretoria just recently, where children are separated by race or skin color because white parents will object. But how do we cure racism if we pander to it all the time? Why are we not saying people are equal and demonstrated racism is a curse that will destroy us all? And I'm reminded that the ANC Youth League, the time of Mda and Lembedi, Mandela, Tambo and Zo and others in the early 1940s, were fed up with the petitioning, letter-writing ANC leadership, became very militant, wanting a powerful ANC, an organization of militant young people. And they responded to the war aims of the Western Allies, Roosevelt, President of the United States, and Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of Great Britain, who issued their war aims and said, it is for decolonization and the equality of all people. And our young intellectuals seized on this and said, well, we want equality. But it became a very Africanist thing, an exclusive African view, which changed quite rapidly because there's an intellectual tension between equality when you say only for us and everybody else has got to get out. Not just whites, but colored and Indian people and anybody else who's not ethnically 100% African. Where's the equality? And so the ANC very quickly moved towards what became the Freedom Charter, when in 1953 Professor Z.K. Matthews proposed the Freedom Charter to draw up an outline of what a future South Africa should look like, but not by a few intellectuals sitting down and writing a manifesto. We went out and we organized 10,000 meetings. Our people said South Africa belongs to all who live in it. And I can't think of any greater act of generosity that the 2/3 or 3/4 of our people, the African people in particular, who said, if South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white together, they're saying, we're not fighting it because you're white, we're fighting it because of your white supremacy. Now that's a tremendously sophisticated distinction, absorbed by the mass of our people and the guideline of the ANC throughout the struggle from 1955 to 1994 and beyond into the Constitution of 1996. We need to uphold it and not make a mockery of it. It's less than a generation. And these attitudes are deeply ingrained in all our thinking. When we see people, we see first skin color. It's hard to ignore. But we go by some stereotype. And what we have to do as individuals is say, no, I'm not going to judge the book by its cover, the person by the skin color. I'm going to say, is this a person I could like? And if I don't have to love everybody, and I don't want to be loved by everybody, that would be a terrible burden. Really, it would be a burden. But I do have to be polite and courteous so that we can get on and cohere as people of different cultural backgrounds who enrich each other. I don't like the idea of Nelson Mandela as Saint Madiba who single-handedly brought us freedom. It's true, he was a great leader, together with Oliver Tambo and others, many others. And he did sacrifice, but tens of thousands of people sacrificed. At least 1,000 were murdered. Ordinary people and great leaders by the security police, security forces. The thousands of prisoners who spent tens of thousands of years in prison also sacrificed, not just Madiba. The brilliance of the leadership of the ANC with its slogan in those tough years of unity in action, was we'll set aside our minor differences to overcome the major problem, which is racism by law. First segregation, then apartheid, under the Afrikaner nationalist government from 1948 to 1994. So you want a better society, and I think we must strive for it. And our Constitution holds out that promise. I want to see our Constitution implemented as best we can and not ignored because of patronage, because of corruption, because I can't be bothered, because it's not my people, so I don't care. What to do? Freedom Charter, Freedom Charter, Freedom Charter, not as words, but as a true guideline for a luta continua. The struggle does continue. And only 22 years after liberation is a blink of an eyelash in the life of a nation. Really. But we could have done more. And we've got to do more. But we have to admit what we're doing wrong. And those leaders who are doing wrong must go. So curing racism, generations of commitment to a much more egalitarian society, not just on the basis of skin color, but of social class. The fact is that the majority of poor people in South Africa are black. There are many colored people who are poor, and there are many Indian people who are poor. The image of the wealthy Indian merchant doesn't apply to all the Indian people of South Africa. There are plenty of Indian workers. These are all problems of racism, not just white against black or black against white. It's so deeply ingrained into the history of all our people that it's going to take literally generations of toleration and consciously saying, I will not be racist, and I, as a leader in an organization or a company or an NGO, will make it my business to ensure that there are people of ability who are appointed to model working together. That's what I want to see. At least that's a beginning. And I want to see leadership in schools. I want to see leadership in trade unions, in trade union branches of teachers. And many teachers are very dedicated, but there are very many who say, pay me enough and I'll help transformation. And at the same time, they praise the great Madiba for his sacrifice. What sacrifice are they making? We're not fully developed. It's going to take effort from everybody, not just a few. And all of this is tied up. And so with your idea of the badge, there needs to be a couple of lectures every term. Why do we wear the badge? And you're going to be asked a question in your history paper, your English, Afrikaans, Xhosa, whatever language paper, somehow, a question about this badge. It has to become a curricular thing, not just a formality. That if you've got to buy the badge, but you never look at it. You've got to look at it. We say over and over South Africa belongs to all the living, and our own leaders don't. They mouth the words, but they don't always follow it through. But there's a future to build. And I am going to quote Saint Madiba when he said, we're a country of 11 languages and many cultures, and we have to become a single nation. And so social cohesion is important. But we have to live social cohesion, not just mouth it.